Hi, everyone. This is week 7 of Public Speaking 2. So, we're going to start this week talking about the news. The news are media, right? When we think about the news, there's so many different things in this world where, we're constantly updated, we're constantly informed about so many different things. We constantly know things at the tip of our fingers, and, within an instance, we can know what's happening halfway around the world. Unlike years before, where, things would be printed in the newspaper in the morning and in the evening. This is a very different time where we're consistently up to date. We have different forms of media. Back in the day and now, people use newspapers. We graduated to magazines, and now we have kind of instant video or instant social media sites that keep us connected and keep us alerted to things around the world. So the news and media, this kind of falls under a big area that we call media literacy. It's all about really being able to know about, how do we kind of understand things in the news, and how do we make sense of it, and how do we talk about it. Once we are in our presentations and we have to do public speaking, the news does come up a lot, because often we are asked, the typical American will always tell you that there are two things to avoid whenever you're meeting someone for the first time. Don't talk about religion, and don't talk about politics. The two things, right? The news is basically politics, but there are a lot of other areas of the news. We have kind of talked about this and touched on this before. If you go to Google News, right, you can see all of the different areas. You see, local news, you see domestic news, you see international news, you see kind of news about cars, you see news about cooking, you see news about entertainment, news about sports, the weather. All those are different sub areas of the news. So we'll talk a lot about kind of what makes up the news, but also how do we incorporate it into our presentations. As public speakers, how do we keep that in the back of our mind, and really be able to present on topics that are kind of really controversial sometimes, right? They will raise the eyebrow, and they will get people kind of really riled up. And you have to be able to kind of control the audience, balancing your kind of a logic of what you're going to say, your rationale of what you're saying, and also kind of the emotions that may be going on in the audience. So we'll talk a lot about that. Let me just unshare my screen for a minute. Before this, we basically asked a couple of questions, and I just want to go through them. The first is, do you pay attention to the news? Why or why not? The next, what questions can be asked in a news consumer questionnaire? What are some adjectives you can use to describe news stories? So again, this is all about the news, and we really want to be able to kind of think about this idea of media literacy. How do we talk about this in our presentations, and how do we be well-informed citizens? In the chat, I see a response from Wenhan. Are you there, Wenhan?
Yes, teacher.
Hi, if you can share your response with the class, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure. For the first question, yes, I'm interested in what is going on all daily, so I will pay attention to the news. Like I pay attention to the news every day. And for the second question, I will use like select all that apply question like format. Like I will ask, how are you consuming media today? And I will give the several choices like TV, internet, for example, Google, or social medias like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc., and newspaper or magazines, whether online or print, radio, podcast, webinar, mobile applications, or others. So they can select all that apply. And for the third question, I will use like informative, recent, or exciting, or interesting, like these words to describe news stories.
Excellent. Yeah, that's excellent. I like that you were able to talk about the different forms of media, how it's kind of evolved, right? It's, as we spoke about before, from newspapers to TV to social media. But also you talked about kind of like, how do we ask people questions on this stuff? Because we have to see it from their lens. And also the adjectives were great. The adjectives are really important to describe kind of, what people are feeling and what people are thinking. That was an excellent response. Thank you so much. I see also in the chat, Jawad. Jawad wrote, I used to kind of care about the news, but nowadays the whole media system is corrupted and a slave of world politics. Interesting. It says, do you trust the news? That question, it says, To what extent do you think it's true? That was kind of the questions he would use for a survey. And the last kind of on adjectives, latest, exclusive, international, daily, excellent. So kind of these are different words that, it kind of categorizes the news. It says, is it international? Is it something you get every day? Something like your daily weather, something like daily sports, right? Our exclusive is our breaking news. Those are things that we hear often in the news. Excellent. Thanks, Jawad. That's good. Kind of going back to our questions. Rohini, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Sure. If you can just read your response.
Yeah, sure. To the first question, do you pay attention to the news? Why or why not? I like to believe that I used to be an avid news reader, or I used to follow the news a lot. But I guess since the pandemic, I've not been because it's really negative. It's really upsetting. So I'm like trying to find a base. Um, it's like, I don't know, maybe it's like very cowardly, but I'm just trying to not listen to anything. Just trying to find a sort of an answer in the uncertainty. So that's my response. Because I feel like, because my next response is actually all connected. Um, what questions can be asked in the news consumer questionnaire? Um, I would guess, because we have so many publications, as in print or flooded with TV channels, news channels. We also have so many blogs. I mean, news is basically on your fingertips, if I had to say. So we for a news questionnaire, I guess it would be like, what's your source of um, news? Where do
Mhm.
you get your news from? And so a questionnaire that's based on, like, if you're trying to do a study or a research, that would be trying to understand the target audience and what's the trend, just to get an idea. I'm not saying that the trend is always right, but I guess it kind of points you to what people, what excites people. I guess that's what even marketing companies tend to use, I guess. And the next question, what are some adjectives you can use to describe news stories? It would be, I mean, I would just go back to my first question. I feel like news stories, they are informative as they're supposed to be, because it's a new information, or a new development in another part of the world that I am obviously unaware of. But I also think that I just wish news is more, worded rightly or positive, or it kind of gives us, just common readers, hope.
Yeah.
And also I really wish that news is just not about, increasing your audience, as in if it's a news debate or whatever,
Mhm.
or increasing the, it shouldn't be just tabloid. That's what I'm trying to say, because there has to be, it's news is supposed to be the fourth democracy. It's like the watchdog of democracy. So I just hope that, instead of raising alarm, that it actually does um, the purpose that it is meant to serve.
Excellent.
So
Thank
yeah.
you. No, that's excellent. And I think you bring up a lot of good points, just how unfortunately, like a lot of things, we live in this like really competitive society. So a lot of news channels are all about ratings, right? And it's all about kind of like who has the most juiciest scoop, right? Like if there is an accident or there's some kind of robbery in progress, now it's not unheard of for like the news helicopter to be next to the police helicopter going down to get the news story because people love that adrenaline rush. You bring up a lot of good points, how sometimes news stories can also be a means of knowing about other places. And I think that's something that a lot of students who are in a class like this would really find interesting. That's how you stay connected to where you're from sometimes, right? You don't just stay connected to your family, but you have to stay connected with, kind of developments. Because, for example, let's say there was something, let's say there was a raise in a spike in virus cases, the virus that's going around, that could affect your travel if you wanted to go home, or that can affect kind of so many different things. So you have to kind of be connected, and you can never kind of like completely like detach if you're especially if you have family from outside the US, right? You really have to care in a way that I don't think a lot of people do sometimes, but a lot of kind of like people who just have their whole family here, if that makes sense. But excellent, thank you. We have been having great points today, just great points on this whole discussion on news and literacy. In the chat, Yash wrote, yes, I do pay attention to news, as I like to be up to date about what's happening outside. Also, it helps me to know about the current situation of COVID, flights, oh, that's exactly what we're talking about, and many more aspects of daily life. In a news consumer questionnaire, different kinds of questions related to the weather, current astronomical updates, political changes, stocks, and prices, latest technologies, etc. Good. So all those are things that can be the news, right? You want to track trends, you want to track patterns. Those are great questions to ask. Mohammed Ibrahim wrote in the chat, yes, I pay attention to news. This might give me what's going on around me. Good. And you might get good insight into that. What do you think news should upgrade and innovate itself into? What kind of changes should be taken into news around the world? These are questions he would ask in a survey. And international political news, those are kind of adjectives. Exactly. Those are adjectives that we add on to our news, right? We're describing it. We're going to say this is global news, this is international news from around the world, from around Europe, wherever it may be, right? So excellent. We have a lot of good responses today. Azel, are you there? I see your response.
Yes, I'm here,
Hi, if
sir.
you could share your response. Thanks.
Okay, for number one question, yes, I do find it interesting to watch what is happening in my city and the world, especially like ABC News at 6:30 with David Muir,
Nice.
who gives.
Oh, sorry, are you there, Azel?
Yes, yeah,
Oh, yeah,
sorry.
no problem.
Yeah, who gives up the up-to-date news from all over the world. And the second, what question can be asked in news consumer questionnaire? So we can ask about the COVID situation, the statistics of incidents of new variant, and also we can talk about the Winter Olympics to be held in China, which we can look forward to. So that's my answer, sir.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And that is kind of, good questions, kind of making sure that we ask those questions so we see people's opinions and we want to be able to see how they feel about those things. Excellent. Is there anyone else that wants to add anything about this topic? Okay. Yeah. Generally, the news is something that, especially in a globalized world, globalized meaning increasingly interconnected, right? So since, the 1990s, this idea of globalization has taken over where, the world is a lot smaller. It's not just because the internet, it's also because the increase of technology, a lot of political things, the end of the Cold War. The people say that that brought our world closer, right? Because it's moving from like this world of like the US and USSR to a lot of different countries trying to work together, even though there is tension, right? So this is something that globalization and the media has definitely gone a full 180, meaning that we are connected in ways we can never imagine. We have so much more technology, and then with that comes this information influx. So we get so much information and it's all about processing. This weekend, we're basically going to talk about, how do we use this idea of news to start a presentation? If we want to use a headline, how do we start a presentation with it? And also, how can we potentially ask people for their insight on something that can be very controversial? So the news is something that is definitely going to make people question, why are you talking about this? But you have to keep in mind, if you want to have a good presentation, you have to talk about things that are interesting. You have to talk about things that will get people kind of motivated and get people kind of interested in what you have to say. It really depends on, the different areas, right? Whatever you're presenting on. But even if you're presenting on something like science, you're going to have to talk about the developments. You're going to have to talk about something that's happened in the field. If you're presenting something about cars, talk about the development with cars, right? That is news. News isn't just the international stuff that we often see every weekend, that kind of, or every night, that kind of turns people against each other, this country versus that country, this economy versus that economy. There's so much more to it, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about this idea of media literacy. How do we understand media, and how can we kind of help other people do that as well? We're going to talk about the importance of the news, but we're also going to talk about kind of like the presentation format of being able to present it and being able to connect with the audience on something that is definitely going to be controversial. So that's kind of, what we have planned for this weekend, and I definitely look forward to being able to go through all the activities to make sure we cover this completely.